There are two things that happened this week that nobody has put in the same room yet. Tonight, we are putting them in the same room. On May 1st, 2026, the Trump administration sent a formal letter to Congress declaring that the 60-day clock on the Iran war under the War Powers Resolution had stopped because of a ceasefire, and that congressional authorization was therefore no longer needed. On that same day, the United States Navy was enforcing a military blockade of Iranian ports, using more than 100 fighter and surveillance aircraft, 2 carrier strike groups, and more than a dozen warships, and naval blockades under international law are an act of war. The administration told Congress the war was over. The Navy was still fighting it. Here is the sequence that matters. Operation Epic Fury began on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched joint military strikes against Iran. Under the War Powers Resolution, the 1973 law passed by Congress over President Nixon's veto, the president must obtain congressional authorization within 60 days of committing U.S. forces to hostilities or withdraw those forces. The 60-day clock started by the administration's own notification on March 2, 2026. That clock reached the 60-day mark on May 1, 2026. And on that day, rather than seeking a vote from Congress or withdrawing forces, the administration sent a letter to Capitol Hill arguing the clock had stopped. The source for that letter? The White House itself, confirmed by multiple outlets including Fox News, NBC, and Al Jazeera. Now here are the two tracks. Track 1, the official narrative. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee on April 30th, 2026. He told senators, "We are in a ceasefire right now, which our understanding means the 60-day clock pauses or stops in a ceasefire." The White House sent its formal notification to Congress the next day, May 1st, declaring, "For War Powers Resolution purposes, the hostilities that began on Saturday, February 28th, have terminated." The administration pointed to the April 8th ceasefire brokered by Pakistan as the moment hostilities ended. House Speaker Mike Johnson said that week, "We are not at war. I don't think we have an active kinetic military bombing, firing, or anything like that." The official line was clear. The ceasefire ended the clock. Congress did not need to act. Track 2, what the documented facts show. On May 1st, 2026, the same day the administration declared hostilities terminated, U.S. forces were actively enforcing a naval blockade of Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz. The blockade involved more than 100 fighter and surveillance aircraft. It involved 2 carrier strike groups. It involved more than a dozen warships. A U.S. Navy destroyer had, on April 20th, fired on and seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship attempting to move through the blockade. Iran had seized 2 foreign commercial vessels in response. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows, remained closed. The Council on Foreign Relations noted that 3 carrier strike groups were deployed in the Middle East for the first time in decades. John Bellinger, who served as legal advisor to the State Department and National Security Council under President George W. Bush, a Republican, said directly, "A ceasefire does not automatically suspend the war powers' 60-day clock." Michael Glennon, a professor of constitutional and international law at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, told NBC News that Trump's argument is a stretch and that he did not believe that the administration is correct in arguing that the clock has stopped. Matthew Green, a political scientist at Catholic University, described the situation plainly. The administration declared the war over while still fighting it. The War Powers Resolution does not contain the word ceasefire. It does not mention a pause. It does not provide a mechanism for stopping the 60-day clock short of withdrawal. Bruce Fein, a former Associate Deputy Attorney General and constitutional law expert, told Al Jazeera that the resolution never says anywhere that the deadline stops if there is a ceasefire, and that accepting that interpretation turns the resolution into simply a paper tiger. Senator Adam Schiff of California said it directly at the April 30th hearing. Ceasing to use some forces while using others does not somehow stop the clock. That statement is not Democratic spin. It describes what the Navy was doing on May 1st. Here is where those two tracks collide for real people. The Strait of Hormuz carries 20% of the world's oil. The International Energy Agency's March 2026 oil market report described the disruption as the largest ever supply disruption of the global oil market. The Congressional Research Service, in a March 26, 2026 report, documented that the conflict cost the United States military nearly $29 billion as of May 12th, and that the Pentagon requested a further $200 billion in additional funding. Arab countries sustained an estimated $120 billion in damages by the end of March. Iran assessed damage to its own economy at a minimum of $300 billion and potentially as much as $1 trillion. That is not a war. That is what an administration told Congress was not an active kinetic military conflict, while its Navy fired on cargo ships in an international strait. At the individual level, the 60-day rule exists precisely for this kind of conflict. It exists because Congress looked at Vietnam, where presidents waged years of undeclared war and decided that no single person should have permanent, unchecked authority to commit the country to armed conflict without a democratic vote. The families of the U.S. service members deployed to 2 carrier strike groups, the pilots flying more than 100 daily sorties, the crews of the warships enforcing the blockade. They are the people the War Powers Resolution was written to protect. The law requires their deployment to be authorized. It requires a vote. The administration argued on May 1st that no such vote was needed. The law says otherwise, and those are not the same thing. At the institutional level, what happened in Congress matters. The House voted 215 to 208 on June 3rd to pass a War Powers Resolution directing the president to end the conflict. 4 Republicans voted with Democrats. Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker of Mississippi, a Republican, told reporters at the May 1st deadline, "I have not spent a great deal of time worrying about that." The Senate then voted 50 to 48 on June 24th to pass its own resolution, the first time in history both chambers had passed such a measure concurrently, before that vote was reversed the following day after a confrontational meeting between Trump and Republican senators. The administration never sought congressional authorization for Operation Epic Fury, not before the strikes, not during the 60 days, not after. Now, I want to be clear about what I am saying and what I am not saying. What is confirmed, the administration launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th without prior congressional authorization. The 60-day clock expired on May 1st without authorization from Congress. A naval blockade was actively in operation on May 1st, using carrier strike groups and over 100 aircraft. The letter declaring hostilities terminated was transmitted to Congress on May 1st, the same day. Legal experts from both parties have publicly stated the ceasefire reset argument has no textual basis in the War Powers Resolution. All of that is documented and on the record. What requires further analysis? The evidence points toward a deliberate legal strategy, not a misreading of the statute. Sourcing suggests that the administration knew the ceasefire reset argument was novel and legally untested, but deployed it anyway because, as Bruce Fein told Al Jazeera, Congress had not been willing to force a constitutional test. Analysts who reviewed this pattern believe the blockade's continuation during the supposed ceasefire was not an oversight. It was a choice. Whether that choice constitutes a violation of federal law is a legal question that, because no court has ruled on war powers constitutionality, has never been answered. Now let us look at the record. Here is what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said at the April 8th ceasefire announcement. The White House released a statement quoting Hegseth directly. From the strike that took out Qasem Soleimani to tearing up the disastrous Obama-Iran deal, to the precision campaign that obliterated Iran's nuclear sites in Operation Midnight Hammer, to the decisive military victory we just achieved in Operation Epic Fury, no other president has shown the courage and resolve of this commander-in-chief. Iran begged for this ceasefire. Here is what Hegseth said 22 days later at the April 30th Senate Armed Services Committee hearing when asked why the administration had not sought congressional authorization. I would defer to the White House. The same man who declared a decisive military victory was, 3 weeks later, telling Congress he had no answer to give them. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia told Hegseth directly that he did not believe the statute would support the ceasefire reset argument. Hegseth did not dispute Kaine's legal reading. He said it was his understanding, an understanding that the law does not share. What is missing from this story is also part of the story. As of this broadcast, the Trump administration has not released the full legal opinion it is relying on to justify the blockade's continuation during the ceasefire period. The administration has not asked Congress for a formal declaration of war. It has not sought an authorization for use of military force. It spent $29 billion of public money, sent American service members into combat, and struck a sovereign nation without a vote by the elected representatives of the American people. That absence is not an oversight. Under the War Powers Resolution, it is the whole point. We have been at a crossroads like this before. In 1999, President Bill Clinton kept American forces in Kosovo for more than 60 days as part of a NATO operation. He did not obtain congressional authorization under the War Powers Resolution. He argued Congress had implicitly approved the deployment by funding it. The House voted to refuse to authorize the mission. It did not pass a resolution to withdraw forces either. The result was a legal standoff with no resolution. The courts declined to rule. The war ended, and the precedent became, if Congress does not act, the executive branch continues. What happened then matters for understanding what could happen now. An administration that argues a ceasefire pauses the war powers clock, while enforcing a naval blockade is making a bet. The bet is that Congress will not act, that courts will not intervene, and that 60 years of legal precedent around this specific question will remain unresolved. The law on the books says one thing. The ships in the Strait of Hormuz on May 1st, 2026 said something else entirely. Tonight's comment question, should the president be required to obtain congressional authorization to maintain a naval blockade of a foreign country during a declared ceasefire? Drop your answer. I want to hear from you.